Welcome back. The Department of Basic Education's disclosure that over 500 incidents of bullying have been reported since the 15th of January this year has highlighted a crisis in schools. Limpopo reported the highest number of cases, while the Free State reported the least. To discuss the long-term effect of bullying, I am now joined by psychologist Chris Kemp. A very good evening to you, Chris. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. Very alarming numbers. I mean, the academic year has just started literally last month. It's been just a little over a month, but we've got over 500 cases of bullying in schools. Talk to us about this trend that we're seeing.
And I think, you say 500 reported, I'm sure the real number is astronomical. And yeah, I work at a Kiso clinic in Randburg and in the adolescent unit, and we see so much harm to the kids there that's come as a result of bullying, in terms of, damaging their self-esteem, their sense of self-worth. And I think that a lot of people, adults who are watching this, can probably relate that their own experience of bullying followed them throughout their lives, that it shaped their personality or their sense of self in some way. So it's not something that's just confined to that school environment. It's something that certainly follows you past that as well.
Yeah, and Chris, the kinds of cases you're seeing, what kinds of bullying? I mean, I'm just assuming bullying has always been there, but over the years it evolves as well. Now we've got social media as well. I'm also assuming that also contributes to bullying as well. If you could just explain the different kinds of bullying that you're seeing that are quite prevalent.
Sure. So, we often talk about traditional bullying. So that would be like sort of verbal, physical stuff that's happening in person at the school, where the kids are literally being assaulted or just sort of verbally bullied. But then obviously what you're referring to is also cyberbullying as well, which is something that obviously with the advent of the internet, with every kid seemingly having a smartphone in their hand, especially teenagers, that's become a huge part of it. And I think what makes it very difficult is that cyberbullying in particular is much more insidious in the sense that it's very hard to police. It's hard for a school to police. It can be very indirect. And I've noticed that kids are very smart about how they go about this. Our concepts of what bullying is, that it'll be something very direct that could be screenshotted and shown to a teacher or principal, simply isn't the truth. They are very cagey in terms of how these things are done, and they're very good at covering their tracks. And so there's a lot of bullying that I feel like goes on in these social groups, WhatsApp, social media, anything else, that simply isn't seen by parents, isn't seen by teachers, and it is very hard to police. Yeah, and oftentimes quite indirect as well. Kids will make their status something that is clearly a message to someone, and everyone reading it understands what that message is. And the person who the message is about feels like everyone knows this is about me. But it's not something that you could point to and sort of get a child in trouble for, because it appears innocuous, but there's a whole sort of understood language beneath that, if I could put it that way.
Yeah, I think the cool kids call it subtweeting, the subliminal message that everybody else kind of knows what you're talking about, but you're not direct about it. And I guess that's what you're talking about, Chris, when you're talking about how difficult it is to police this. So how do then teachers in schools ensure that they are able to identify these forms of bullying, and also parents at home?
I think the number one thing really is we need to go to the children and to try and make sure that they are speaking up. I think the uncomfortable truth is that it's actually very hard for parents or teachers to have full control of this. And I think schools often don't want to admit that they don't have a lot of control over bullying, simply because it can be so insidious, it can be subtle. Imagine a situation where a child's group of friends all decide to just ignore that child, to not talk to them at all. And that's nothing that a teacher could point to and say, hey, stop bullying, because they're not assaulting them or verbally abusing them. And you can't force someone to be friends with someone. But insidious things like that can be very effective in harming someone's happiness and sense of self-esteem. So we really need to go back to the children and make them feel safe to speak up about it. And I think the number one thing parents can do or teachers can do is say, come and talk to us about it, and we will decide together how to handle it. I think kids often feel like the moment they share, now it's run away from them. That parent or that teacher is going to do something, potentially make it worse. The idea being that, you're going to go to school and talk to these bullies, and that's going to make it worse, and it's going to be so embarrassing. So I would try and emphasize the child's autonomy in that process. Talk to me about it so we can go through it together, but we won't do anything without talking to you first and coming up with a solution together. I think if you can make it feel cooperative and that they would have some control over the process, it would probably go a long way towards having them open up about it more. And that's really the first step we need. We need these children to come forward, because the most damage is done when this is happening behind the scenes and parents and teachers aren't aware of it, and the damage is being done, and there's no one to bring attention to it.
Yeah, and I guess, Chris, bullies would want to keep it as a secret, would want to keep it more that the child doesn't want to open up to parents and obviously tell on. And there are repercussions if that obviously child then tells parents or teachers, and that teacher does take action. But I think about, this recent case in Cape Town where a 14-year-old boy committed suicide, and it said that in that case, the boy had repeatedly gone to the teacher to say that they are being bullied, and apparently these cries fell on deaf ears. And the example you made now, for instance, if a whole group of your friends decides they're no longer going to talk to you, and at those teenage years, being so impressionable as well, it can have a lasting impact. If you could just talk to us about the psychological effects of undergoing such bullying.
Yeah, and speaking of cyberbullying, I actually did my master's research on cyberbullying, and one of the things that I noted in that was that cyberbullying is actually more strongly linked to suicidal behavior. And so it is a risk factor for that, a higher risk factor than traditional bullying. And I think it does show that while we think of bullying, if we think of physical bullying, kids being assaulted, that feels more severe to us. But this insidious nature of cyberbullying, breaking down of someone's sense of self-worth, and that's really the huge thing there, is that our confidence, our sense of self-worth is so skewed by this bullying that we start to feel worthless ourselves. We feel like it's never going to get better. And when you inject those feelings of hopelessness, that's when you really start to run the risk of things like suicidal behavior or thoughts, things like that, because when we feel like there's no way out of a situation. And that's why it's so imperative that there is a discussion, because the moment you share that with someone else, they can help broaden your perspective somewhat, and you don't feel so alone in suffering through that. And I think, Shem, that's terrible what happened with that boy, because obviously he felt alone, and that would have been a huge part of what made him feel so hopeless, was feeling like, I've done the one thing that I feel like I can do, and nothing's changed. And when that sense of hopelessness comes in and feels like nothing's going to get better, that's when really it's at its most harmful. And so that's what we worry about the most with bullying, is the damage it does to people's sense of self and their own identity, really, and how they see themselves. It can be very, very harmful.
Quite often we talk about the parents of the victim of the bully. I want us to talk about the parents of the bully. How do you, as a parent, identify that you have a child who could possibly be a bully?
I think that I would say where there's smoke, there's fire to a certain extent. So I think being willing to accept that your child might be engaging in this behavior is a good start. I think parents don't want to believe that about their children, and understandably so. But if you're hearing reports, if parents or other teachers or people are saying to you that this is happening, be open-minded to discussing it. And I think beyond that, obviously, most of the time, people who are bullying are often going through things themselves. Oftentimes they are redirecting anger or pain that they're feeling and putting that on someone else. So I think just looking out for your child's mental health, just checking for any changes in behavior, just trying to establish a dialogue with them as well. Just making sure that you have the kind of relationship with your child where they can talk to you or do talk to you. And I know parents of teenagers are rolling their eyes right now. I know that they're not the most open, but even if they're not communicating, you want to keep communicating as a parent. Hey, I am here and I am willing to listen. And there's nothing you can say about how you're feeling that would ever get you in trouble. You get in trouble for your behaviors, you never get in trouble for your feelings. And I think that's a really important distinction. So all feelings are safe to be shared, and you are totally open to that. So you can create the space. Obviously, you can't force someone to use it, but I do think that a bullying crisis is very much linked to a mental health crisis. And I think that those two go hand in hand. So we need to target the mental health of our teenagers and our kids in order to alleviate some of this bullying as well.
Yeah. And just briefly, would you say that our school safety framework is keeping up with how bullying is advancing? You know, we're speaking about cyberbullying now and the insidious ways that children now know how to bully one another. Are our laws and framework also keeping up with these trends?
I think in general, no. I think that the wheels of bureaucracy turn slowly, as we know. And I just think that we don't yet know exactly how to tackle these things. And I think we could certainly be doing more. And that's why I say it goes back to the parents. Don't rely on the school to police this, because I don't think that they are able to. Even if they are very well intentioned, oftentimes they're not able to. And so it comes back to your own relationship with your child, and make sure that they're talking to you, because you can't rely on the school to be able to tell you that this is happening.
The old adage, communication is key. Chris, thank you so much for joining us this evening and talking about this very important conversation. That's psychologist Chris Kemp, just talking to us about bullying in general, specifically in schools.